Hi, I really think we are living in a golden age when it comes to the overall accessibility of producing orchestral music, whether that's for a film, TV games, or whatever. And like many people, my first experience of producing orchestral music was within the framework of using a DAW with a free sample library, of which there are now many great ones. However, there is kind of a different approach to take with this, and that is to use sheet music engraving software. And this is something that has become a lot more enticing recently because very popular free and open source music notation software called MuseScore recently released a huge update. And for me personally, one of the most interesting parts of this update is that they added this really advanced, basically orchestral playback engine. So it kind of works like a sample library, except it's even more intelligent because it's baked into the MuseScore program and runs exclusively there. So it can look ahead in the score to see what notes are coming up, what articulations will be needed in a few seconds time, which in theory makes it a lot more smarter than your average sample library in your DAW, for instance. And the fact that this is all available for free really excited me, and I wanted to test it out against one of the best free orchestral sample libraries out there to see if this is a better alternative. So in order to assess this, I last week basically took one of my pieces that I wrote for a D&D campaign. It's super epic, modern, kind of action cue style orchestral music, and I tried recreating it both with Spitfire's excellent free BBCSO Symphony Orchestra Discover edition and with MuseScore to see which one is the king of free sample libraries. So to give you a bit of context, here's what the original track sounds like. I'll only play a little bit of it. So this is how BBCSO Discover sounded. So one of the things I really like about BBCSO Discover is just how many options it gives you. You know, a lot of free sample libraries are just whole ensemble strings or whatever, but in BBCSO Discover you get access to the violins, the violas, the cellos, and you can all program each of those families differently, which I really appreciate. Of course, like most things in life, there are always caveats. I think for this particular piece, one of the biggest losses in BBCSO Discover is the absence of a solo violin. And because there is no solo violin in the package, I had to use the Violins 1 kind of ensemble patch, which, I mean, it certainly worked, but it's just really not that convincing because there is no legato in BBCSO Discover, which basically means there's no programmed transitions between different notes, so it can sound a little bit kind of computery, I guess. Another big blow is that the strings don't have any spiccato articulations. That's the really super fast short notes, so I had to settle for staccato instead, which again, it works, but the notes are just a bit too long for this kind of epic action piece. It doesn't quite fit the genre amazingly well. And then finally, I think this is one of the biggest issues I have with BBCSO Discover as a whole, is just the lack of round robins. So if you're doing like short repeated notes, because there's like no alternative recordings, it's always triggering the same recording, it just doesn't sound amazingly good. It sounds pretty computerized. But with all those caveats aside, I think it is still a very capable program as long as you're able to work within the confines of its limitations. Alright, so MuseScore. I gotta say off the bat, I really love the solo violin sound in this, because not only does BBCSO Discover not have a solo violin, this solo violin in MuseScore is honestly like, might be my new favourite. I've spent lots of money on solo violin libraries. And I gotta say, I think MuseScore's new built-in solo violin kind of sounds better. It's got more of a kind of like emotional edge, which I really like. Hard to explain. Similar to BBCSO Discover, I'm not sure I'd quite call the short strings notes in this quite spiccato. They're definitely better and shorter than the staccato from BBCSO Discover, but I think in an ideal world for this kind of fast, loud cue, I still want the notes to be a little bit quicker, but it's definitely an improvement over BBCSO, that's for sure. But let's talk about the elephant in the room. MuseScore is not a DAW. It works in totally different ways. To even really consider this, you have to be fairly familiar with sheet music and how it works, especially because a lot of the smaller kind of like expression and articulation things work totally different in MuseScore compared to how they work in a DAW. For example, if you want to get that really short spiccato string kind of sound, in a DAW it's pretty easy. You just choose your key switch or go into your sample library and select the right option, right? In MuseScore, you have to use staccato marks above the notes so that it knows that these notes are meant to be spiccato. You don't really have access to the actual sounds in quite the same way that you would in a sample library. You just have to put in the right markings on the sheet music and pray that MuseScore kind of gets what you mean. In a similar way, I found the mixer panel in MuseScore to be actually surprisingly very functional and easy to use. You can add in like custom VST instruments to play each part, or you can use MuseSound's own sounds. There's even a whole host of like compression and EQ you can add, which I thought was actually really progressive for a music engraving software. However, there is a big but here, and that is you can't really do volume automation in the same way that you would in a DAW. So it's kind of more difficult to be expressive with the music. So say for example, you want one bar of music to be loud and then the next one to be kind of less loud. In the typical DAW workflow, you would just like draw the graph to automate the volume. But in MuseScore, you have to use dynamic markings from real sheet music. And again, it's fine if you know sheet music and that sort of thing is probably second nature, but if you aren't in that sphere, then it's kind of strange and opaque to get used to because you're not dealing with volume numbers. You have mezzo forte and piano and all of those things. And obviously with those markings, there's only like 6 or 7 of them, so you don't quite have the same amount of granular control over the mix that you would with a traditional DAW. But in essence, to sum up this whole debate, I really think that the MuseScore final result actually sounded a lot better than the BBCSO Discover version. I think on both ends there's probably more things I could have done to make them sound more realistic, but I wanted to keep it simple, quick, and just to give you a very surface level comparison without changing the mix or the dynamics too much. So if you're familiar with sheet music and you want to give this a go, I would say try it. See if it works for you. I was really impressed by the breadth of sampling and the quality of the sounds I got out of MuseScore. But it isn't for everybody, because obviously it's sheet music. You cannot be as granular and have as deep of a control over the final mix and the final output as you would in a DAW. But it's definitely given me some pause for thought, and it's really made the possibility of writing more sheet music in the future seem more exciting to me, because that was always the issue with sheet music engraving software, is that the output would always sound like terrible 90s general MIDI, I'm playing Super Mario 64, come fucking sue me. And we don't have that issue anymore, so it's great. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how MuseScore can further adapt their program to make it even more accessible to people who aren't in the sheet music world, I guess.